Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the fifth episode of Edgar Church's Basement, a collectible comics podcast from me, your host, Rob Larson. I run a blog called itsalljustcomics.com and an associated YouTube channel, youtube.com/itsalljustcomics, where I talk about high-end collectible comics, original art, comic book pedigrees, auctions, historical collecting, data, facts, anecdotes, anything about collecting high-end comics. CGC Comics, CBCS, etc. Anything on that is what I talk about. Mostly what I do on the blog and on YouTube are very focused. So I'll either be looking at an auction, a current auction, or a historical auction catalog, or I'll be doing research into a specific topic and presenting my data. And that's, where this podcast comes in. I haven't had the opportunity to kind of discuss topics without a framework, without a goal. Whereas here on the podcast, I am kind of just musing on some things. I'm doing less structured research. Actually, I'm just doing research, right? I'm doing before I present it as, finished research, I'm kind of looking at things and discussing them here. And so the first 3 episodes were about the top 25 most valuable comic books in the world, which is an ongoing project. And last episode, I talked about the top 10 platinum age comic books. And the point of that, and the point of this episode, is I was pinged on the CGC forum. I was mentioned, and the topic of the post was the top 10 most important, most valuable, most significant, etc. pre-hero comic books. So if you look at the Overstreet top 10 list of platinum age books, they are sequential art, they are comics, they are books, but they're not what we think of as comic books, right? You wouldn't look at what they can't be CGC graded, for example. Then none of them would fit into a holder, right? They're books. And so the idea was to look at pre-Superman appearing in Action Number 1, to the dawn of the pamphlet as we know it. What are the most important books? What are the most valuable books? And, kind of come up with a list that is actually relevant to comic book collectors. So Detective Comics number 1, for example, which is such a significant book and is a famous book. And if you watch my YouTube channel, I love that book. It's not in, the top 10 platinum age books. It's in the top 100 golden age books at number 45 or whatever, which, to me is fine, but it also doesn't differentiate between the pre-hero and hero eras of the golden age. And I think that there's a significant difference between those, right? I mean, there's a whole reason that Action Number 1 is the most important American comic book of all time. It's because it changed the landscape. But that doesn't mean that some of the books that came out before shouldn't be highlighted and appreciated on their own merits, right? Detective Comics number 1 is a perfect example of that. But there are other examples, and we're going to talk about those. So that's the purpose of this episode, and probably next episode. I already have a list of 25 books that I'm going to kind of look at, get a value on, place in the timeline, etc. Just discuss, and then eventually come out with what I think is a good top 10 list. I'm going to start with value, so I'm going to probably look at the top 15 or so most valuable books, and then I might move the list around, value aside, depending on books that I think are more significant or less significant. But we'll see how that goes. And value might actually be a good arbiter for this top 10 list. But so it's going to be interesting. And we're going to start with Comics Magazine number 1. The Comics Magazine number 1. Comics Magazine Co. First Comics Mag, Centaur Publications. May 1936. Number 1, first appearance of Dr. Mystic, aka Dr. Occult, by Siegel and Schuster. The first appearance of a Superman prototype in comics, so people say. Dr. Mystic is not in costume, but later appears in costume as a more pronounced prototype in More Fun 14 to 17. Very fine value, $26,000. Heritage sold a CGC 7.5 copy of this book in June of 2024 for $32,400. That's the second highest graded, tied with another in 7.5. The highest graded copy is the CGC 9.0, which sold in June of 2017 for $38,000. which is interesting because, as I mentioned, the VF price is the highest price in the Overstreet Guide. So there is actually a VF near mint copy of this book, and they don't list a price for it in very fine near mint. So, and of course, value aside, if as you heard the names Siegel and Schuster and Superman Prototype, you'll know that this is a very important book, regardless of value, although it is valuable, right? So, uh, this one's a leader in the clubhouse already. So, next up in our analysis and our candidates for this kind of top 10 is another one that's really pretty significant and is pretty valuable as well. New Fun Comics number one, February 1935. The first DC comic. And of course, this later becomes More Fun Comics, which is like a huge book in the pantheon of Golden Age DC titles, many first appearances, and a really classic title. So, but yeah, first DC comic puts it pretty high up on the list. Well, it is important. It should be noted that it is gigantic. It's 10 by 15, so it's bigger than even your average Golden Age book. So that is something to take into account. Although I'm certainly counting this one as a comic book, right? It is. It looks like a comic book other than the fact that it's bigger. So you wouldn't call Superman versus Muhammad Ali not a comic book just because it's gigantic. So that's what we're doing with this one. Really cool book. The highest value I think I was able to see is about $14,000 from last year at Heritage for an apparent good, which, if I'm not mistaken, had three edges trimmed, which is like my least favorite quote unquote restoration of all time. But at least it's graded good. So they're taking into account, maybe they're taking into account the paper losses damage, which is, I believe, how that should be handled. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, huge book, and literally and figuratively. So there you have it. Okay, next up is a book that I really didn't know about. Like, obviously, not obvious, but New Fun Comics number one, for example, is a book that I would recognize from across the street. Comics Magazine number one is a book I knew about, mostly because of Siegel and Schuster. Funny Pages number 6, which is previously the Comics Magazine. So Comics Magazine 1 through 5, and then November 1936, it becomes Funny Pages. So, and in this book, the clock begins. 2 pages, first appearance, ends number 11. The clock is the first masked comic book hero, and that's just something I just did not know. Not particularly valuable, so the near mint minus value is $9,000, but first masked hero is pretty cool. The highest graded copy in the CGC census is the Larson Pedigree copy, which is a CGC 7.5. That book sold in 2017 for $7,422, which is, I believe, the high for this book in any grade. And it's also the highest graded copy, so not a bad result. There's a Lost Valley Pedigree copy as well, a 7.0, which is the second highest graded, and that sold for $5,900 in May of 2018. Not the most expensive book that we've looked at so far, but certainly interesting and new to me. So I'm learning, which is part of the reason that I'm doing this, because it's going to be fun. I'm going to get caught up on all these pre-hero books that I'm always jealous people can rattle off without even thinking about it. And I cannot do that. So next up is a big book. One of my favorites on this list. I can assure you of that right now. I knew it going in. I've already talked about it. Detective Comics number 1, March 1937. Scarce, says Overstreet. Slam Bradley and Spy by Siegel and Schuster, Speed Saunders by Stoner and Flessel, Cosmo, The Phantom of Disguise, Buck Marshall, Bruce Nelson Begins, Chin Lung in The Claws of the Red Dragon serial begins, Vincent Sullivan cover. VF value, highest grade in the price listing, is $165,000. There is no very fine near mint or near mint minus price. This book actually has a CGC 8.0, and the next highest graded is a tie for 3 6.5s. A 6.5 sold earlier this year. I covered it on my YouTube channel for $228,000 in 6.5 in April. There is an Edgar Church copy of this book. I'm assuming it must have been secondhand. I'm actually not sure about that. It is very good to find, so it's not like the best copy, but it is the Church copy. It was listed in Overstreet 27, so 1997, for a trade value of $150,000, which seemed insane at the time for a very good to find copy of this book, a 5.0, but now would be, a bargain, right? Because it would still be the church copy, and it's one of the toughest books in the hobby and one of the most iconic books in the hobby. So interesting. Next up is Famous Funnies #1, Rare, July 1934. Eastern Color Printing Company. First monthly newsstand comic book that is significant. Contains Sunday strip reprints of Toonerville Folks, Mutt and Jeff, Hairbreadth Harry. Never heard of that one. Smatter Pop, S apostrophe Matter Pop, Smatter Pop. Nipper, Dixie Duggan, The Bungle Family, Connie, Ben Webster, Tailspin Tommy, The Nebs, Joe Palooka, and others. So I know about Joe Palooka and Mutt and Jeff. I know none of those others. I'm not man enough to admit it. It's fine. VF price as the highest price in the price guide, highest grade in the price guide, $26,500. The census is actually kind of surprising. There are two 8.5s of this book from 1934, which seems pretty nuts. There are three 6.5s. The most valuable copy that's sold is $25,000 for a CGC 5.0 copy that sold in December of 2023 for $25,000. One of the 6.5s sold in 2014 for $7,768. Additionally, a 6.0 sold for $22,800 in 2022. So this book actually trades hands more often than I would expect for a book from 1934. There's a decent sales history for this, and the census isn't as sparse as some other books from this time period. So I learned something there. Yeah, there are 29 unrestored copies, 1 qualified, and 18 restored copies for a total of 48 for a book from 1934. So that's actually pretty good. So interesting stuff. The next book we're going to look at, we're back to New Fun. So New Fun Comics #6, October 1935. First, Dr. Occult by Siegel and Schuster. Last New Fun title, by the way, would turn into more fun with the next issue. Henry Duval ends #10, also by Siegel and Schuster. VF price $33,000. There is no verified near mint or near mint minus price listed for this book. Like New Fun Comics #1, New Fun Comics #6 is gigantic. So it's not like in a CGC holder. There is no CGC census for this book. The most valuable book I can see in the Heritage Archives is a copy that sold in October of last year for $8,400. Yeah, so it's a gigantic, rare book with a very significant first appearance. So gotta love it. Next up is Famous Funnies Series 1, listed as very rare by Overstreet. No date, although it's early 1934. 68 pages. No publisher given, although it is Eastern Color Printing. Sold in chain stores for 10 cents. 35,000 print run. Contains Sunday strip reprints, etc. It's a common theme with these early books. They're strip reprints. This book is, in fact, very difficult to find. The CGC census has 15 total copies. There are 8 unrestored and 7 restored. The highest graded copy is a VG, 4.5. There are 3 of them, so there are 3 tied for the highest graded. One of the 4.5s sold for $23,500 in August of 2014. Next up is a very cool book that is definitely included value or no value. So, cool book. More Fun #14. October 1936, #14. Dr. Occult. First Dr. Occult in costume. First in color. Superman prototype. First DC appearance. Continues from the comic magazine. Ends #17. So this is a pretty significant book. Again, Dr. Occult, a Superman prototype, moving towards Superman in Action Comics. The high for this book in VF, which is again the highest grade listed in Overstreet, is $17,000. The census for this book actually includes 2 7.0s, 2 6.5s, 2 6.0s, 2 5.5s. There's a lot of these. actually. So we just talked about a book that there were barely any. There are 26 unrestored copies of this book in the census, which for a book from 1936 is actually pretty good. There are only 8 restored copies, which seems like such a weird ratio. Usually it's 1 to 1, so there's 50% restored and unrestored. Why this book would not be restored as often as other books from this era is beyond me. So there are some sales of note. The highest value sale is $7,106 from July of 2022 for CGC 6.0. And then the Lost Valley Pedigree has sold 3 times as a CGC 5.5. Once for $6,000 in 2023, once for $6,600 in 2022, and once for $4,300 in 2012. So first, Dr. Occult in costume. Important book. Very cool. Next up on the list is something I was not familiar with. I mean, familiar with, but not that familiar with. And I hadn't realized that um, New Fun Comics was changed to More Fun Comics because of the existence of New Comics #1, which is interesting. Volume 1, number 1, December 1935. Billy the Kid, Sage Brush and Cactus, Jibby Jones, Needles, The Vikings, Sirloin of Beef. Now, when I was a boy, and other 1 to 2 page strips, 2 pages Kelly art first, Gulliver's Travels, Sheldon Mayer art first, 2 page strips, Vincent Sullivan cover first. $16,000 in VF. Once again, no price listed higher than VF. By itself, it's not all that significant considering the number of number 1 strip reprints, etc., etc., etc. There are some interesting artists involved with this. But the interesting thing is, New Comics becomes New Adventure Comics, and then eventually becomes Adventure Comics, which of course ran until the 80s and Crisis and whatever, and included a long run of Superboy and first appearances by incredible characters and all kinds of stuff. So big title, starts with a different name, but this is, the adventure #1 in effect. So that is something to note. The CGC census has a shocking CGC 9.2 copy. The next highest graded, there are 2 copies tied at 7.0. That 9.2 copy has actually sold. So it sold in May of 2010 for $15,535. The most recent sale is $10,500 in January of 2025. And of course, there is a Lost Valley pedigree, which originally sold for $3,850 in November of 2005 as a CGC 5.0, and later sold as a CGC 4.5 for $3,240. So it lost a half a point and lost a few bucks over the years, which is a bummer. I should actually research whether or not those are the same copy. I'm assuming so. I'm assuming there weren't dupes of this book in the Lost Valley pedigree, but stranger things have happened. That's an interesting book. I knew that. I knew that Adventure Comics started off as something else, but I hadn't actually traced the thread through recently, so it wasn't at top of mind. So next up is a pretty interesting book. Funnies on Parade. This is a promotional, so you're in trouble when you're looking through the Overstreet Guide, and it says see promotional section. So you have to flip to the front of the book. Always fun. This is a very famous cover to me, quite recognizable. No Number contains Sunday page reprints of Mutt and Jeff, Joe Palooka, Hairbreadth Harry, Regular Fellas, Skippy, and others. 10,000 print run. This book was printed by Procter & Gamble, by Eastern Color Printing, by the way, in 1933, and given away and came out before Famous Funnies or Century of Comics. So it predates the first newsstand comic books, but is not a newsstand comic book. It's a promotional, but the format is quite familiar. And in fact, there are CGC graded copies of this book. This book has a listing in 9.2 of $26,500 in Overstreet. And like I said, there are CGC graded copies. And the census goes as high as 8.0. There are 3 8.0 copies, 1 7.5, 1 7.0, and a total of 14 copies unrestored and 5 restored copies. So that's actually pretty scarce for some of the books that we've been talking about so far. Not the toughest book to find, but still pretty tough, which is surprising that there are 8.0s when it's that difficult to find. The most valuable copy that's sold so far is a 5.0 that sold for $12,900 in September of 2019. One of the 8 O's sold for $11,950 in November of 2014. So historically important, even though it's not a newsstand book. And like I said, very memorable, right? Like if you see this cover, it's something you've seen before. If not in person, because it's not that common, but you've definitely seen it in price guides and whatever, because it is called out because it's historically significant. So and with that, that's it for now. I've done 10 books, which took me longer than I expected, but there's a lot of information to go through. And yeah, and I want to be, kind of thorough as I kind of evaluate these books as I'm going through the list. And that was interesting. I learned some things. Hopefully you did too. And yeah, next week I'll be back and I'm going to kind of just jam through this list and learn some more about some pre-hero comic books. There's some really cool stuff coming up, some really interesting stuff, and some things I know nothing about. So we're going to learn a little bit. We're going to celebrate some things that I already know about. And yeah, it's going to be fun. So thank you. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Elsewhere, just thanks for checking this out. And, make sure you check out the YouTube channel for more coverage of stuff like this, and the blog for all kinds of stuff and content that goes back 20 years, more than 20 years, actually. And yeah, thank you. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.